Welcome to Ancient Relics Keeper, where forgotten civilizations, unexplained wonders, and ancient secrets come back to life. Ready to unravel the mystery? Let's begin the journey. For centuries, stories have been told of sacred relics holding immense power. But none have captured the world's imagination like the Holy Grail. Is it the lost cup from the Last Supper waiting to be found? Or is it a symbol for a secret so profound it could change history forever? The story of the Holy Grail, the most famous and elusive relic in all of human history, does not begin in a grand castle or on a bloody battlefield. It doesn't start with knights in shining armor or with whispers of secret societies. Instead, its origins are humble, rooted in a moment of profound quiet and deep sorrow, in a small borrowed room in Jerusalem nearly 2,000 years ago. To understand the legend, we must first travel back to that time, to the final night of a man who was about to change the world forever. The setting is the Last Supper, a Passover meal shared between Jesus and his 12 disciples. The air in that upper room would have been thick with unspoken tension. Outside, the city was bustling with pilgrims, but inside, a heavy sense of finality hung over the small gathering. Jesus knew his time was short, and his followers, though they may not have fully understood, could feel that this night was different. It was not a celebration, but a farewell. In the center of this scene, amidst the unleavened bread and bitter herbs of the Seder meal, was a simple cup. We must strip away the centuries of myth and romance that have transformed it into a golden, jewel-encrusted chalice. The object at the heart of this story was almost certainly unremarkable. It would have been a common vessel of the time, perhaps carved from dark, sturdy olive wood, its surface worn smooth by years of use. It might have been a simple earthenware cup, cool to the touch, or even one made of stone, common in Jewish households of the era to ensure ritual purity. It was a cup of the people, functional and plain, meant for sharing wine, not for worship. Yet it was this very cup that Jesus chose. As the meal progressed, he took this simple vessel, filled it with wine, and passed it among his disciples. And as he did, he spoke the words that would echo through millennia, the words that would transform this ordinary object into the most sacred artifact in Christianity. "Drink from it, all of you," he said. "This is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." In that singular moment, the cup ceased to be just a cup. It became a symbol, a physical link to a divine promise. It was the first vessel to hold the symbolic blood of Christ, the centerpiece of a new ritual, the Eucharist, that would be performed by billions in the centuries to come. For the disciples in that room, it was a moment of deep, confusing symbolism. For the history that would follow, it was the birth of a legend. The cup was now imbued with a sacred purpose, forever tied to the most pivotal event in the Christian faith. It had witnessed the final moments of peace before the betrayal and chaos that would soon erupt. And as the night ended and the disciples scattered, the cup for a time was forgotten, its brief but world-altering role seemingly over. But its journey had only just begun. The story now turns to a figure who is both crucial and mysterious, a man who moves in the shadows of the Gospels, Joseph of Arimathea. He is described as a wealthy man, a respected member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish high council that would condemn Jesus. Yet, the scriptures tell us he was also a secret disciple, a man who believed but was afraid to admit it publicly for fear of his peers. He was a man caught between two worlds, his position of power and his private faith. It is Joseph who steps out of the shadows at the moment of greatest darkness, after the crucifixion. As Jesus' body hung upon the cross at Golgotha, a place of public execution and despair, Joseph performed an act of incredible bravery and devotion. While the disciples were in hiding, terrified for their own lives, Joseph went directly to the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, and asked for the body of Jesus. This was an immense risk. By associating himself so openly with a condemned criminal, he was jeopardizing his wealth, his status, and even his life. But legend tells us he did more than just claim the body for burial. It is in this dark, sorrowful moment that the humble cup from the Last Supper reappears, completing its transformation from a symbolic vessel into a true relic. According to the tales that would blossom in the following centuries, Joseph of Arimathea, driven by his profound faith, took that very same cup to the foot of the cross. There, as a Roman soldier pierced Jesus' side with a spear, Joseph used the cup to catch the drops of sacred blood and water that flowed from the wound. This act is the absolute core of the Grail's power. The cup that had once held the symbolic wine of the covenant now held the literal blood of the divine. It had become a container for the very essence of life and sacrifice. The fusion of these two events, the Last Supper and the crucifixion, elevated the cup to an unparalleled status. It was no longer just an object that had been present at a holy event. It was an object that had actively participated, becoming a sacred reliquary holding the most powerful substance on earth. With this impossibly precious artifact in his possession, Joseph, along with Nicodemus, prepared Jesus' body for burial, wrapping it in linen and placing it in a new tomb that Joseph had carved for himself out of the rock. He had fulfilled his duty, giving his master an honorable burial when all others had fled. But now Joseph was a marked man. His public act of devotion had exposed him. He was the keeper of a secret, the guardian of a relic whose significance he surely understood. He could not remain in Jerusalem, where the political and religious climate was lethally hostile. His mission was no longer just to protect a memory, but to safeguard a living piece of the divine. And to do that, he had to disappear from the pages of verifiable history and step fully into the realm of legend. He had to take the Grail to a place of safety, far from its enemies, to a land at the very edge of the known world. Legend picks up the trail where history leaves off, charting a perilous course for Joseph and his sacred treasure. He was now a fugitive, a guardian on the run. The stories say he fled the Holy Land, accompanied by a small band of followers, carrying the Holy Grail with him. Their destination was a place considered by the Romans to be the ultimate frontier, a remote and mystical island shrouded in mist and ancient folklore. The land of Britain. Why Britain? To the people of the Mediterranean, it was a world away, a land of tin mines and druids, a place where the power of Rome was still being contested. This very remoteness made it the perfect hiding place. Some versions of the legend suggest that Joseph, being a wealthy man likely involved in the tin trade, already had connections to Britain, giving his seemingly random choice of destination a thin thread of plausibility. The journey itself would have been an epic ordeal, a testament to Joseph's dedication. It was a voyage across the treacherous waters of the Mediterranean, past the Pillars of Hercules, and up the storm-tossed Atlantic coast. It was a journey that would have taken months, filled with the constant threat of pirates, Roman patrols, and the unforgiving sea. Every day of that journey the Grail would have been the center of their existence, a source of hope and a heavy burden to protect. Finally, after their long and harrowing voyage, Joseph and his followers are said to have landed on the shores of Britain. They made their way inland, to a place that was already ancient and sacred to the local people, Glastonbury. In the 1st century, Glastonbury was not the town we know today. It was a strange and otherworldly landscape, a collection of hills rising like islands from a watery, marsh-like plain. The largest of these hills, Glastonbury Tor, with its distinctive terrace slopes, was a center of pagan worship. It was known in Celtic lore as the Isle of Avalon, the mythical gateway to the otherworld. It was here, in this heartland of ancient British mysticism, that Joseph chose to establish his sanctuary. The legend becomes beautifully specific at this point. It is said that upon arriving, a weary Joseph of Arimathea thrust his staff into the ground on a hill overlooking the marshes. The staff, made from the same thorn bush used for Christ's crown of thorns, miraculously took root and blossomed. This became the famous Glastonbury thorn, a tree that flowered every Christmas and became a living symbol of the arrival of a new faith in an old land. Here, on this hallowed ground, Joseph and his followers are said to have built the first Christian church in Britain. It wasn't a grand stone cathedral, but a humble structure of wattle and daub interwoven branches incly a church as simple and unassuming as the Grail itself. And within this primitive sanctuary, the Holy Grail, the cup of the Last Supper, was hidden. Joseph became its first guardian, the first in a long secret line of protectors. He had succeeded in his mission. The Grail was safe, its existence a secret known only to a chosen few, its power slumbering in the misty heart of Britain. The story could have ended there, with the Grail forever hidden, a private relic for a small, isolated community of believers. But an object of such power cannot remain secret forever. Its very nature demands to be known, and its influence began to seep into the soil and soul of the land, giving rise to stories of its incredible, miraculous abilities. The powers attributed to the Holy Grail are the fuel that ignited centuries of quests and captivated the imagination of a continent. These were not minor charms or simple blessings. The Grail was believed to be a direct conduit to the power of God, capable of miracles that defied the laws of nature. Its primary power, spoken of in nearly every version of the legend, was healing. This was not the simple mending of a broken bone, but a profound restoration of both body and soul. It was said to be able to cure any disease, heal any wound, and even bring a person back from the brink of death. In later Arthurian legends, this power becomes central to the story of the Fisher King, a monarch who suffers from a mysterious wound that will not heal. His wound is reflected in his kingdom, which has become a barren wasteland. Only the appearance of the Holy Grail and a question asked by a pure-hearted knight can heal the king and, in doing so, restore the land to fertility. The Grail's healing, therefore, was not just personal but cosmic. Flowing directly from its power to heal was its ability to grant sustenance and eternal youth. The legends describe the Grail as a vessel of endless provision. In its presence, a small amount of food and drink could feed a multitude. For its guardians, it provided a spiritual feast that sustained them, keeping them alive and vital far beyond a normal human lifespan. This wasn't necessarily a physical immortality, like that of a vampire, but a state of suspended aging, a preservation of life through divine grace. To be in the presence of the Grail was to be touched by eternity, to be freed from the decay and corruption of the mortal world. This made the Grail the ultimate treasure, an object that offered an escape from humanity's two greatest fears, sickness and death. It promised a perfect, unending life, a tantalizing prize that would drive kings and knights to madness in their desire to possess it. Yet, for all its physical blessings, the Grail's greatest power was spiritual. It was a test of character, a divine mirror that reflected the soul of the person who sought it. To the impure of heart, the Grail would remain hidden, or its presence would bring about their destruction. Only those who were truly virtuous, humble, and spiritually pure could ever hope to behold it. And for that worthy individual, the Grail offered the ultimate reward, a direct vision of God. This was the true climax of the quest, known as the beatific vision. To see the Grail in its full glory was to experience a moment of divine ecstasy, a glimpse into the secrets of heaven and creation. It was a spiritual union so powerful that, for some like the knight Galahad in the Arthurian tales, there was nothing left to live for in the mortal world afterward. Having achieved the ultimate spiritual goal, their souls were taken directly to heaven. These three powers, healing, sustenance, and divine revelation, combined to create an object of unimaginable worth. The Holy Grail was the ultimate prize, a physical object that promised spiritual perfection. It was the answer to every human longing, for health, for life, and for meaning. The stories of its power, whispered first around fires in Britain, slowly grew and spread. They mingled with the Celtic myths of magical cauldrons of plenty and rebirth, creating a rich and complex mythology. The humble wooden cup from the Last Supper, stained with the blood of a divine sacrifice, carried across the world by a faithful guardian, and hidden in a land of ancient magic, was now a legend in the making. It lay dormant, waiting. For centuries it would be protected by its secret lineage of guardians, a silent, potent force hidden from the world. But the whispers of its existence and its incredible powers would never truly die. They would eventually reach the ears of kings and poets, igniting the fires of the greatest quest in Western literature, and sending the Knights of the Round Table on a desperate search for the lost cup of Christ, an artifact that promised to heal their broken world. The age of the quest was about to begin, all born from this powerful origin story. For centuries after Joseph of Arimathea supposedly brought the Grail to the misty shores of Britain, the legend remained just that, a legend. It was a local folktale, a quiet story of faith whispered among the faithful in the damp, green heart of Somerset. It was a relic for a small community, its power contained, its existence a secret from the wider world. The humble cup from the Last Supper, now a sacred vessel, slumbered in its sanctuary, far from the grand stage of history. But nothing with that much power, that much potential, can stay hidden forever. In the 12th century, a perfect storm of cultural, religious, and political forces would converge, and this quiet British legend would be catapulted from its sleepy hollow into the very center of European consciousness. The story of the Grail was about to be reborn, transformed from a simple tale of religious devotion into the greatest romance and the most perilous quest the world had ever known. This transformation wasn't gradual. It was an explosion of creativity, one that began not in a church, but in the glittering, ambitious courts of medieval France. The world of the 12th century was a place of dramatic change and profound contradiction. The Crusades were raging in the Holy Land, sending knights and pilgrims eastward and bringing back a flood of new ideas, exotic goods, and most importantly, sacred relics. The cult of relics was at its absolute peak. Cathedrals across Europe vied for prestige by acquiring a splinter of the true cross, a bone from a saint, or a thread from the Virgin Mary's veil. At the same time, the ideals of chivalry and courtly love were sweeping through the aristocratic courts. This was the age of the knight, a warrior bound by a complex code of honor, duty, and service, not just to his king but to his lady. Stories of brave heroes, epic battles, and romantic love were the entertainment of the day, sung by troubadours and written by court poets. It was into this fertile soil of religious fervor and romantic idealism that the seed of the Grail legend fell, and it found its first great cultivator in a man named Chrétien de Troyes. Chrétien was a French poet, a master storyteller writing in the late 1100s for one of the most sophisticated courts in Europe, that of Marie de Champagne. He took the existing popular tales of King Arthur and his knights and infused them with a new depth and psychological complexity. Around 1180, he began his final and most mysterious work, Perceval, the Story of the Grail. This was the moment the Grail stepped onto the world stage. But what Chrétien presented was not yet the Holy Grail as we know it. His story was enigmatic, filled with a dreamlike, almost surreal quality. He introduces us to Perceval, a young man raised in isolation in the forests of Wales by his mother, kept deliberately ignorant of the world of knights and chivalry. He is a pure fool and innocent. One day he encounters knights in shining armor, and mistaking them for angels, decides he must become one himself. He travels to Arthur's court and, after a series of naive misadventures, sets out on his own. It is during these travels that he comes to a mysterious castle, home to a wounded king known as the Fisher King. The king, unable to rise, invites Perceval to stay. What follows is one of the most famous and baffling scenes in all of literature, the Grail procession. As Perceval watches, a strange and solemn procession emerges from another room. First comes a young man holding a white lance, from whose tip a single drop of blood runs down. Then come two more youths holding golden candelabra. And finally a beautiful maiden appears, carrying an object that Chrétien calls simply a Grail. He describes it as being made of the purest gold, set with precious jewels, and radiating a light so brilliant it dims the candles in the room. This Grail is not described as a cup, but more like a wide, deep dish or platter. Perceval, remembering a piece of advice he was given to not talk too much, remains silent. He is bursting with questions: what is this procession? Who is the bleeding lance for? And most importantly, whom does the Grail serve? But he forces himself to say nothing, believing it to be the polite and knightly thing to do. He goes to bed, and when he awakes the next morning, the castle is deserted. He rides away, and only then does he learn the catastrophic consequences of his silence. He discovers that had he asked the right question, the wounded Fisher King would have been healed, and his lands, which lie barren and desolate, would have been restored to fertility. Perceval has failed. He has failed not through malice or weakness, but through a misguided sense of etiquette. He vows to spend the rest of his life searching for the Grail castle once more, to ask the question and undo his mistake. This is where Crétin de Troyes left the story. He died before he could finish it, leaving Perceval on his quest, and the world with the tantalizing unresolved mystery. What was the Grail? What was the lance? Who was the Fisher King? This unfinished masterpiece created a literary phenomenon. It was a cliffhanger that lasted for centuries. Dozens of other writers and poets rushed to write their own continuations and prequels, each one adding new layers and details to the legend. It was a German poet, Wolfram von Eschenbach, who imagined the Grail not as a cup or dish, but as a magical stone that had fallen from heaven, guarded by a neutral host of angels who had sided with neither God nor Lucifer in the Great War. But it was another French poet, Robert de Boron, who would make the most crucial connection of all. In his work, he explicitly linked Crétin's mysterious, glowing Grail to the story of Joseph of Arimathea. He identified it as the very cup from the Last Supper, the same one used to catch Christ's blood at the crucifixion. With that single brilliant stroke of literary fusion, the transformation was complete. The mystical platter of courtly romance had been forged with the sacred relic of Christian faith. The Holy Grail was born. It was no longer just a magical object in a fairy tale castle. It was the ultimate Christian relic, and the quest for it became the highest and holiest calling a knight could undertake. With the Grail now firmly embedded in the world of King Arthur, the nature of the quest itself underwent a profound change. It was no longer a simple adventure story about a young knight trying to correct a mistake. It evolved into a complex spiritual allegory, a journey into the very soul of man. The quest for the Holy Grail became a test of virtue, a trial where inner purity was far more important than the strength of one's sword arm. This is a radical departure from the standard heroic epics of the time. In most tales, the hero succeeds through his cunning, his bravery, or his physical prowess. But in the Grail quest, those qualities were secondary. The search was a spiritual pilgrimage, and the path to the Grail was paved not with slain dragons, but with conquered personal sins. The central metaphor for this spiritual struggle was the wasteland. The suffering of the Fisher King and the barrenness of his kingdom were not just plot devices. They were a powerful symbol for a world afflicted by sin and spiritual decay. The king's wound, often located in the thigh or groin, represented a failure of faith, a loss of purity that had cosmic consequences. His sickness was the kingdom's sickness. The land was infertile, the crops wouldn't grow, the people were in despair, all because their leader and by extension, the world of chivalry itself had lost its spiritual center. The only thing that could heal the king and restore the land was the Grail, a direct touch of the divine. Therefore, the knight who sought the Grail was not just seeking a personal reward. He was on a mission to heal the entire world. This meant the quest was open only to those who were themselves spiritually whole. The Grail was a divine object, and it would not reveal itself to the unworthy. It demanded a level of moral and spiritual perfection that was almost impossible to achieve. The stories are filled with knights who are otherwise paragons of chivalry, but who fail spectacularly in their quest for the Grail. They fail because of pride, because of worldly ambition, because of lust, or simply because their faith is not absolute. The Grail demanded total humility, unwavering chastity, and a heart completely devoted to God. It was a standard so high that it seemed designed to make the quest impossible, highlighting the fallen nature of humanity. This concept was given a powerful physical symbol at the heart of Camelot itself. The Siege Perilous, the perilous seat. This was an empty chair at the Round Table, magically reserved by Merlin for the knight who would one day succeed in the Grail quest. It was a place of immense honor, but also of immense danger. The name was literal. Any knight who was unworthy and dared to sit in it would be immediately consumed by fire and destroyed. For years the seat remained empty, a constant silent reminder of the great, unfinished task that lay before the Fellowship of the Round Table. It represented the immense spiritual risk of the quest. To even attempt it was to invite divine judgment, and failure could mean not just disappointment but total annihilation. The Siege Perilous was the ultimate test of worthiness before the journey had even begun, waiting for the one knight pure enough to claim it and by doing so, claim his destiny as the Grail hero. The grand, collective quest begins when the Grail itself makes a stunning mystical appearance at Camelot. During a feast at Pentecost, a clap of thunder shakes the hall. A sunbeam brighter than any other pierces the room, and the Holy Grail, covered by a cloth of white silk, floats through the air. It fills the hall with sweet odors and provides every knight with his favorite food and drink. No one sees the vessel itself, only the cloth that covers it, but the experience is so profound that the knights, led by the passionate Sir Gawain, immediately leap to their feet and swear an oath. They vow that they will ride out for a year and a day, and will not return to Camelot until they have seen the Grail unveiled. King Arthur is heartbroken, for he knows that this quest will shatter the Fellowship of the Round Table. He senses that many of his greatest knights will die on this journey, and that Camelot will never be the same again. But the vow has been made, and the quest must begin. And Arthur's fears prove correct. The quest exposes the hidden flaws in even the best of his knights. The most tragic failure is that of Sir Lancelot, the greatest knight in the world. He is the strongest, bravest, and most chivalrous warrior of his age. In any other story he would be the hero. But in the Grail quest, his defining strength is overshadowed by his one great sin: his adulterous love for Queen Guinevere. This love, though portrayed as noble in other romances, is a spiritual poison here. It ties his heart to the earth when the Grail demands it be lifted to heaven. Lancelot gets agonizingly close. He finds the Grail chapel, but when he tries to enter, a fiery breath knocks him back, and he falls into a swoon for 24 days, a day for each year he has lived in sin. He is granted a brief, clouded vision of the Grail, but he is forbidden from truly achieving it. His failure is a powerful lesson. Worldly perfection and earthly love, no matter how grand, are as nothing compared to spiritual purity. Lancelot returns to Camelot a broken man, humbled and aware of his own spiritual poverty. Other knights, like the noble Sir Gawain, fail for different reasons. Gawain is a good man, but he is too attached to the earthly code of chivalry and worldly honor. He cannot fully surrender his will to God's, and so the Grail eludes him as well. Their failures serve to elevate the one who will succeed, to prove that the Grail Knight must be a new kind of hero entirely. Out of the failures of the worldly knights rises the one true Grail hero, Sir Galahad. He is the embodiment of spiritual perfection, a figure almost more angelic than human. Galahad is the illegitimate son of Sir Lancelot and Elaine of Corbenic, the daughter of the Grail Keeper. He was conceived through an enchantment, a union that was both sinful and divinely ordained. Raised by nuns in a convent, he grows up completely shielded from the temptations of the world. He is a virgin, a knight who has never known sin. His arrival at Camelot is dramatic and prophetic. An old man leads him into the hall, directly to the Siege Perilous. The magical inscription on the seat changes to read, "This is the seat of Galahad. He sits down without harm, proving his destiny." He then proceeds to pull a miraculous sword from a stone floating in the river, an act that mirrors Arthur's own rise to kingship and confirms Galahad as the chosen one. Galahad's quest is fundamentally different from that of the other knights. While they wander through a world of tournaments, monsters, and earthly adventures, Galahad travels through a landscape of spiritual allegory. His trials are temptations, his battles are against the 7 deadly sins, and his companions are Sir Bors and Sir Percival, 2 other knights who, through their own virtue, are allowed to accompany him. Galahad is armed with a white shield bearing a red cross, said to have been drawn with the blood of Joseph of Arimathea, a symbol of his pure faith. He moves through the world with a serene, otherworldly purpose, his eyes fixed on a single holy goal. The climax of the entire literary saga comes when the 3 knights finally arrive at the Grail castle, Corbenic. There, they are greeted by descendants of Joseph of Arimathea, and are led into the Grail chamber. A figure who is either Joseph himself or Jesus Christ in the guise of a bishop appears and celebrates a holy mass. He summons Galahad and allows him to do what no other mortal has been allowed to do, to look directly into the unveiled Grail. What Galahad sees is not described in detail, for it is beyond mortal language. It is the beatific vision, a direct, unfiltered experience of the divine, a glimpse into the secrets of God and creation. The experience is so overwhelmingly beautiful, so spiritually fulfilling, that it effectively ends his earthly journey. He has achieved the ultimate purpose of human existence. After this vision, Galahad knows his time in the world is over. He is transported, along with the Grail, to the holy city of Sarras in the Middle East. After a year of ruling as its king, he prays for his soul to be released from his mortal body. Angels descend from heaven, he bids farewell to his companions, and his soul is carried up into the celestial light. At the same moment, a hand reaches down from the sky and takes the Holy Grail and the bleeding lance with him. They are removed from the world of men, never to be seen again. The quest is over. Sir Bors is the only one to return to Camelot to tell the tale, a tale of triumph and of devastating loss. The Grail has been achieved, but in doing so the best knight has been lost, and the world is left a lesser place. This ending solidifies the Grail's status as a literary and spiritual symbol. Its story concluded, its physical presence removed from the earth. But this is where one of the most compelling modern theories begins. What if the story didn't end there? What if the Grail wasn't taken to heaven? What if it was simply hidden again, this time protected not by a fictional line of guardians, but by a very real and very powerful historical organization? This is where the legend leaps from the pages of medieval romance into the shadowy world of historical conspiracy. And at the heart of it all are the Knights Templar. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, as they were officially known, were a real-life military order, founded around 1119 during the Crusades. Their stated purpose was to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They were warrior monks, bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, a combination that made them the most disciplined and effective fighting force of their age. Over the next 2 centuries, they grew into one of the most powerful and wealthy organizations in the world, with a network of castles, farms, and commanderies stretching across Europe and the Middle East. They invented international banking, they acted as treasurers for kings, and they answered to no one but the Pope himself. They were shrouded in secrecy, their initiation rites were private, and their power was immense. The parallels between the real-life Templars and the fictional Grail Guardians of the romances are striking and impossible to ignore. Both were elite orders of holy warriors. Both were dedicated to a sacred cause. Both operated under a veil of intense secrecy. It didn't take long for people to start connecting the dots. The theory that began to emerge was electrifying. What if the Templars, during their initial years headquartered on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, the very site of Solomon's temple, had been doing more than just protecting pilgrims? What if they had been secretly excavating beneath the holy site? And what if, in those sacred tunnels, they had found something of unimaginable importance? The theory posits that they discovered the greatest lost treasures of Judeo-Christian history, perhaps the Ark of the Covenant, or, as the most popular version claims, the Holy Grail itself. This alleged discovery, the theory goes, became the true source of the Templars' meteoric rise to power. It wasn't just their banking prowess or their military skill. It was the possession of a holy relic that gave them a secret spiritual authority, and perhaps, a source of leverage over the crowns of Europe and even the papacy. They became the real-life guardians of the Grail, protecting it with their lives and their sacred honor. For nearly 200 years they kept this secret, while the Grail romances flourished in the courts of Europe, romances that, some theorists argue, may have been a form of Templar propaganda, a way of hinting at their secret without ever revealing it. But the Templars' power made them enemies. King Philip IV of France, who was deeply in debt to the order, grew to resent their influence and covet their wealth. In a meticulously planned, brutal operation, he moved against them. On Friday, October 13, 1307, his agents arrested hundreds of Templars across France. They were thrown into dungeons and subjected to horrific torture until they confessed to a laundry list of heretical charges: denying Christ, spitting on the cross, worshipping a demonic head named Baphomet, and engaging in homosexual rites. While many of these confessions were undoubtedly false, extracted under extreme duress, they were enough to seal the order's fate. The Pope, under pressure from the French king, officially disbanded the Knights Templar in 1312. Their Grand Master Jacques de Molay was burned at the stake in Paris. Here lies the core of the enduring mystery. When King Philip's men raided the main Templar treasury in Paris, they found it practically empty. The legendary Templar treasure, the vast accumulation of 2 centuries of wealth, was gone. Their powerful fleet of ships, docked at the port of La Rochelle, had also vanished overnight. The treasure and the fleet were never seen again. Where did it go? And what exactly was this treasure? While it certainly included gold, silver, and precious documents, the Grail theory provides a far more compelling answer. The true treasure, the object the Templars valued above all else, was the Holy Grail. Warned of their impending arrest, a small dedicated group of knights had smuggled it out of Paris and spirited it away to safety. The question of where they took it has fueled countless books, documentaries, and treasure hunts. One popular theory points to Scotland, a nation that was at the time excommunicated and thus outside the Pope's direct control, making it a perfect refuge. The theory suggests the Templars brought the Grail to Scotland and hid it beneath the mysterious and heavily symbolic Rosslyn Chapel, a church covered in a bizarre mix of Christian and pagan carvings. Another theory traces their escape to Portugal, where the Templar order was not suppressed but simply rebranded as the Order of Christ, which went on to fund the great voyages of the Age of Discovery. Did a secret knowledge, protected by the Grail's guardians, fuel the exploration of the New World? A third theory points to Switzerland, suggesting that the Templar treasure became the foundation for the famously secretive Swiss banking system. This connection takes the Grail out of the realm of pure fiction and embeds it in the gritty, violent, and conspiratorial world of real history. It suggests the quest is not over. It implies that the Grail is not in heaven, but is still here on earth, protected by the descendants of a secret society, waiting to be rediscovered. The romance of the Middle Ages had become the ultimate conspiracy of the modern era. The stories of King Arthur, the noble failure of Lancelot, and the holy triumph of Galahad are among the most powerful in all of Western culture. The theory of the Knights Templar, with their secret excavations and their dramatic, fiery end, adds a layer of real-world conspiracy that is almost too compelling to be fiction. But all of these legends, both literary and historical, are built upon one fundamental assumption: that the Holy Grail is a real physical object, a tangible artifact that was held, hidden and sought after. If we accept that premise, even for a moment, then the quest doesn't end with a hand reaching down from the heavens, or with the lost Templar fleet sailing into the mists of history. It continues. It moves out of the realm of myth and into the museums, cathedrals, and dusty archives of our own world. The question becomes not what does the Grail symbolize, but a much more direct one. Where is it now? For centuries, this question has driven a very different kind of quest. This is not a journey of knights on horseback, but of historians, archaeologists, and theologians. They are searching for clues, not in ancient prophecies, but in shipping manifests, papal inventories, and the carbon-14 signatures of decaying wood. And in this real-world search, a handful of artifacts have emerged from the shadows of history, each with a passionate group of supporters who claim that this is the one. This is the true Grail. To investigate these claims, we must leave Camelot behind and travel across Europe, to the very places where these celebrated relics are kept. Our journey is a detective story, an investigation into the provenance and plausibility of the world's most famous candidates for the Cup of Christ. Our first stop takes us to the sun-drenched coast of Spain, to the vibrant city of Valencia. There, within the magnificent Valencia Cathedral, lies a special opulent chapel, the Capilla del Santo Cáliz. It is a place of serene grandeur, adorned with soaring Gothic arches and intricate alabaster carvings depicting scenes from the Old and New Testaments. And there, protected behind glass, displayed in a stunning gold and jewel-encrusted reliquary, sits the object of our search, the Holy Chalice of Valencia. At first glance, it looks exactly like the Grail of medieval Roman, say a golden, majestic cup fit for a king. But one must look closer, for the elaborate gold stand, the handles set with pearls, emeralds, and sapphires, are not the relic itself. They are a later addition, a beautiful medieval creation designed to hold and glorify the true prize. The actual candidate for the Holy Grail is the far simpler object they cradle. A small, unassuming cup carved from a single piece of dark reddish-brown agate. It is about the size of a teacup, polished smooth, its surface showing the natural swirling bands of the stone. It is humble yet beautiful, ancient and mysterious. And according to a tradition embraced by millions, and even tacitly supported by the Vatican itself, this very stone cup is the one Jesus held in his hands at the Last Supper. The story of how it came to be here is a grand epic of faith, persecution, and preservation, a chain of custody that stretches back 2,000 years. The tradition begins, of course, in that upper room in Jerusalem. After the crucifixion and resurrection, the cup was not left behind. It was taken by St. Peter, the rock upon which the church was built, and carried with him to Rome. There it became the official chalice of the early popes, used by Peter's successors to celebrate the Massachusetts. For over 2 centuries, it remained the secret, sacred treasure of the fledgling Christian community in the heart of the Roman Empire. Then came the year 258 AD, a time of brutal persecution under the Emperor Valerian. Christians were being hunted, their sacred places desecrated, their leaders executed. The Pope at the time, Sixtus II, knew his own martyrdom was imminent. He also knew that the Church's most precious physical link to its founder was in grave danger of being seized and destroyed by the Roman authorities. He entrusted the cup to his most trusted deacon, a young man of Spanish origin named St. Lawrence. Sixtus commanded him to protect it at all costs. Lawrence, facing his own horrific martyrdom, was famously roasted alive on a gridiron new. He could not keep the chalice safe in Rome. So, he arranged for it to be smuggled out of the city and sent to his family's homeland, to Huesca in Spain. The Grail had escaped the fall of Rome. For the next 700 years, the chalice lived a life in the shadows. It was hidden away by a succession of bishops and monks in the remote, rugged mountains of the Pyrenees. It moved from cave to monastery, from the sanctuary of San Juan de la Peña to the abbey of San Pedro de Cyresa, always one step ahead of the Moorish armies that had conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula. During this long dark period, its existence was a closely guarded secret, its location known only to a handful of faithful guardians. This long gap in the public record is, for believers, a sign of its successful protection. For skeptics, it is a convenient 7th-century hole in the evidence. The chalice finally reemerges into the light of documented history in the year 1399. It is officially given by the monastery of San Juan de la Peña to the King of Aragon, Martin I, a pious and avid collector of relics. The king was so convinced of its authenticity that he kept it in his personal chapel in Zaragoza, and later in Barcelona. The cup remained in the possession of the Aragonese royal family for several decades until King Alfonso V, facing financial difficulties, passed it to the Valencia Cathedral in 1437 as collateral for a loan. The loan was never repaid, and the cathedral became its permanent home. It has remained there ever since, surviving the Napoleonic Wars by being hidden away by a local gardener, and weathering the Spanish Civil War by being concealed within the walls of a private home. In the modern era, its status has only grown. Both Pope John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI celebrated Mass with the chalice during their visits to Valencia, a powerful, albeit unofficial, endorsement from the Holy See. This is a remarkable story, a clear and unbroken chain of tradition that seems to lead directly back to St. Peter. But is it true? When we apply the cold, hard lens of historical and scientific analysis, the picture becomes more complicated. The most significant problem is the utter lack of any written documentation before the 14th century. For the first 1,300 years of its supposed history, we have only oral tradition to rely on. There are no letters from early popes mentioning the cup, no inventories from Spanish monasteries listing it. It's a powerful story, but one without contemporary proof. However, in 1960, a Spanish archaeologist named Antonio Beltrán Martínez was given permission to study the cup itself, separating it from its medieval stand. His findings were astonishing. He determined that the cup was carved from a single piece of agate in a workshop in either Palestine, Syria, or Egypt. Most importantly, based on the style of carving, he dated its creation to somewhere between the 4th century BC and the 1st century AD. This is the crucial point. The cup is archaeologically consistent with the time and place of Jesus. It is a genuine antique from the Greco-Roman world, the kind of vessel that could very well have been present in a Jerusalem home during the Passover of 33 AD. This scientific evidence gives the Valencia chalice a claim that no other candidate can match. It doesn't prove it's the Grail, but it proves it could be. It places the object at the right crime scene at the right time. And for that reason, of all the physical contenders, the Santo Cáliz of Valencia remains the most plausible, a tantalizing artifact where the line between faith and verifiable fact becomes beautifully, maddeningly thin. Now we journey from the sunny warmth of Spain to the historic port city of Genoa, in northern Italy. Here, in the Cathedral of San Lorenzo's Treasury Museum, we find our second candidate, the Sacro Catino, or the Sacred Bowl. And immediately, we are confronted with a very different kind of object, one that seems to spring from a different version of the legend entirely. The Sacro Catino is not a simple cup. It is a large hexagonal bowl, almost like a platter, made of a vibrant, translucent green material that seems to glow from within. For centuries, it was believed to be carved from a single flawless emerald of immense size. Its shape immediately calls to mind not the cup of the Last Supper, but the enigmatic Grail described by Crétin de Troyes in his original romance, a wide, shallow dish. The story of the Sacro Catino does not begin in antiquity, but in the heart of the Crusader period. In the year 1101, during the First Crusade, an army of Genoese soldiers helped capture the wealthy port city of Caesarea in the Holy Land. As they plundered the city, they discovered this magnificent green bowl. The local chronicles are clear. They believed they had found the very vessel from which Jesus and his disciples had eaten the Passover lamb. Some legends even claimed it was a gift given by the Queen of Sheba to King Solomon, and was later used at the Last Supper. They brought the bowl back to Genoa not just as a spoil of war, but as a holy relic of the highest order, a symbol of their city's piety and military might. For the next 700 years, the Sacro Catino was Genoa's most prized possession. The belief that it was made of pure emerald was never questioned. It was considered one of the wonders of the world, and to even touch it was forbidden. It was only displayed to the public once a year, held aloft by a prelate with ropes, for fear it might be dropped and shatter. Its fame was immense. It was a testament to God's favor upon the city of Genoa. Its legend was seemingly unbreakable, as solid as the emerald it was supposedly made from. But then came Napoleon. In the early 1800s, the French emperor's army swept through Italy. In 1806 they captured Genoa, and like conquerors throughout history, they plundered its treasures. The Sacro Catino was taken from the cathedral and sent to Paris to be put on display. And it was there, in the cold, rational light of post-revolutionary France, that the legend collided with science. The experts at the Louvre, unimpressed by its holy reputation, decided to study the object. They examined it, they tested it, and they made a shocking discovery. The Sacro Catino was not an emerald. It was not even a natural stone. It was a piece of ancient, man-made Byzantine glass. A beautiful, masterfully crafted piece of glass, to be sure, but glass nonetheless. The revelation was devastating. The myth that had defined Genoa's spiritual identity for centuries was shattered in an instant. The object was still a valuable and historic artifact from the Crusades, but its claim to be a biblical relic was utterly destroyed. In a final, tragic indignity, when the bowl was eventually returned to Genoa after Napoleon's fall, it was accidentally broken in transit. Today, it sits in the museum, carefully repaired, the fine dark lines of the cracks still visible across its glowing green surface. Those cracks are a permanent physical scar, a reminder of a shattered legend. The story of the Sacro Catino is a powerful cautionary tale in the search for relics. It shows how easily a beautiful object can become a vessel for our hopes and beliefs, and how brutally a single inconvenient fact can bring the entire edifice of legend crashing down. Our final candidate takes us to a very different world. We leave the grand cathedrals and bustling cities of the continent and travel to the windswept, rain-soaked countryside of Wales. Here, in a place steeped in Celtic myth and Arthurian lore, we find the story of the Nantios Cup. This artifact offers a vision of the Grail that is the complete opposite of the others. There is no gold, no jewels, no glowing emerald glass. The Nantios Cup is a small, dark, fragmented piece of wood. It is battered and broken, little more than the base of a simple bowl, its surface rough and worn. It looks less like a holy relic, and more like something you might find in the mud at an archaeological dig. And yet, for many, this very humility is the most convincing evidence of all. If the Holy Grail was indeed the cup used by a humble carpenter from Nazareth, wouldn't it look exactly like this? The legend of the Nantios Cup is deeply intertwined with Glastonbury, the legendary Avalon, and the story of Joseph of Arimathea. The tradition holds that the cup was not just brought to Britain by Joseph, but that it was safeguarded for over 1,000 years by the monks of Glastonbury Abbey. It was their most secret and sacred treasure. Then, in the 1530s, King Henry VIII began his violent dissolution of the monasteries. He sought to break the power of the Catholic Church in England, seize its immense wealth, and establish himself as the head of a new Church of England. Abbeys and monasteries across the land were looted, their holy treasures melted down, their libraries burned, and their monks driven out or executed. As the king's agents marched towards Glastonbury, the last and greatest of the English abbeys, a small group of 7 monks knew their world was about to end. They gathered their most precious possession, the sacred wooden cup that had been in their care for centuries, and they fled into the Welsh hills. They traveled by night, seeking refuge, until they found sanctuary at the remote Nantios mansion, home to the Powell family. There the monks lived out the rest of their days. As the last of the 7 lay on his deathbed, he entrusted the cup to the family, charging them to guard it until the true church returned to power. The Powell family kept that promise. For nearly 400 years, they were the secret guardians of the Nantios cup. Over those centuries, the cup's reputation for miraculous healing grew. It was believed that drinking water from the cup could cure all manner of illnesses, from tuberculosis to cancer. Pilgrims, both rich and poor, would make their way to the isolated mansion to seek its aid. The cup was so revered that people would often bite off tiny splinters of the wood to take with them as a personal talisman, an act of desperate faith that explains the cup's fragmented and broken condition today. The story is incredibly compelling. It presents a direct, unbroken chain of guardianship, from the monks of Glastonbury all the way back to Joseph of Arimathea. It is a tale of faith, loyalty, and resistance against a tyrannical king. But once again, what does modern science have to say? In the 2010s, the Nantios cup, which had passed into private hands after the last of the Powell family died out, was subjected to a rigorous series of scientific tests. Researchers analyzed the wood and, most importantly, performed radiocarbon dating. The results were definitive, and for believers, they were heartbreaking. The analysis showed that the cup was made from wych elm, a wood commonly used for domestic vessels in the Middle Ages. But the carbon dating delivered the final blow. It placed the origin of the wood in the 14th century. The Nantios cup was not a 2,000-year-old relic from the Holy Land. It was a medieval bowl, made in Britain over 1,300 years too late to have been at the Last Supper. The most likely explanation is that it was a mazer, a type of communal drinking bowl common in the medieval period. Because of its association with the old Nantios estate, and perhaps because of some early stories of its healing properties, the powerful Glastonbury Grail legend was later attached to it, transforming a simple wooden bowl into a contender for the most sacred relic on earth. So where does this leave us? We have examined 3 of the most famous and compelling candidates for the physical Holy Grail. The Chalice of Valencia has the right age and origin, but lacks any documentary proof for its first 13 centuries. The Sacro Catino of Genoa has a documented Crusader history, but was proven to be made of the wrong material. The Nantios cup has a powerful and romantic backstory, but has been scientifically dated to the wrong millennium. The truth is, from a purely historical and archaeological perspective, the search for a single, provable Holy Grail is almost certainly a quest for an object that cannot be found. The historian's view on this matter is necessarily skeptical. The fundamental problem is the complete absence of primary source evidence from the time of Christ. The Gospels of the New Testament, which are the earliest accounts we have of Jesus' life, mention the cup only in the context of the Last Supper. They say nothing about what happened to it afterward. There is no mention of Joseph of Arimathea taking it to the cross, no mention of it being saved as a relic. These crucial parts of the story are later additions, legends that began to appear hundreds of years after the fact. The Grail legend as a cultural phenomenon, the questing and the romance, did not truly begin until the late 12th century, with the poetry of Chrétien de Troyes. It is far more likely that the stories came first, and the search for physical objects to match the stories came later. In the Middle Ages, the culture of relics was driven by faith, not by forensic evidence. The authenticity of a relic was often secondary to the power of the belief invested in it. If a community believed that a particular object was holy, then for all practical purposes it was holy. It could become a center for pilgrimage, it could generate income for a church, and it could be credited with miracles, whether through the power of faith, the placebo effect, or simple coincidence. It is entirely possible that the artifacts we have examined are a product of this very process. Beautiful, ancient, or evocative objects that, over time, became magnets for the powerful and popular Grail legend. While the physical search may be a dead end, it has given us these incredible artifacts, each a fascinating mystery in its own right. They are windows into the medieval mind, testaments to the enduring power of faith, and monuments to our deep human need to find a tangible connection to the great stories that shape our world. But if these cups are not the Grail, and if no other physical candidate has a stronger claim, then we are forced to confront a radical and profound possibility. Perhaps we have been searching for the wrong thing all along. Perhaps the Holy Grail is not a lost artifact at all. Perhaps it is a symbol, a code word for a secret so explosive and so dangerous that it had to be hidden in plain sight, disguised as a quest for a simple cup. This is the path our investigation must now take, into the world of metaphor, heresy, and the greatest conspiracy theory in religious history. We have followed the trail of the Holy Grail through centuries of myth and history. We have seen it transform from a simple cup at a final meal into the centerpiece of Arthurian romance, a treasure supposedly guarded by the Knights Templar. We have journeyed to the cathedrals of Spain and Italy and the windswept hills of Wales, examining the physical contenders for this most sacred of relics. And at every turn, the quest for a tangible, provable artifact has led us to a dead end. The chalice of Valencia is of the right age but has no early history. The Sacro Catino of Genoa was proven to be glass. The Nantios cup was made 1,000 years too late. The historical record is silent. The archaeological evidence is absent. After all this searching, we are left with a profound sense of emptiness, the feeling that the object of our quest may not exist in the physical world at all. This is precisely where the most radical, most controversial, and for many most compelling theory of the Holy Grail begins. It is a theory that suggests the entire quest, the centuries of stories, the secret societies, and the hidden relics has been a grand and brilliant misdirection. Proposes that we have been looking for the wrong thing because we have been misreading the clues. This theory argues that the Holy Grail is not an object, not a cup, not a dish, not a stone. It is a metaphor. It is a code, a symbol for a secret so earth-shattering that it had to be concealed within the allegorical folds of a romantic quest. To understand this theory, we must go back to the very language of the legend, to a single easily misunderstood phrase that may hold the key to unlocking the entire mystery. The journey into this new interpretation begins with a simple act of linguistic detective work. In the medieval French romances where the Grail story first blossomed, the term used for the holy object was Saint Grail. For centuries, this was universally understood to mean Holy Grail. San for holy from the Latin sanctus and Grail for grail or cup. Seems straightforward. But what if that spacing is wrong? What if the original phrase was not two words, but one later misinterpreted? This theory, first popularized in the 20th century, suggests that Sangreal should not be split as Sangreal, but as Sangreal. And in Old French, as in modern Spanish and Italian, Sangreal means something entirely different. It means royal blood. Suddenly, with that one simple change, the entire meaning of the quest is turned on its head. The search for the Holy Grail is no longer a search for a physical cup that once held the blood of Christ. It becomes a search for the royal blood itself, not the blood spilled at the crucifixion, but the blood that was passed on through a sacred lineage. The Holy Grail, in this interpretation, is not a vessel made of wood or stone, but a human vessel. The theory proposes that the cup or chalice that held the blood of Christ was, in fact, the womb of a woman. And this woman, the true Holy Grail, was none other than Mary Magdalene. This is a breathtaking heretical leap. It takes Mary Magdalene, a figure traditionally portrayed by the Church as a repentant prostitute and a humble follower of Jesus, and elevates her to a position of supreme importance. In this version of the story, she was not just a disciple, she was Jesus's wife. This idea finds some of its roots in alternative Gospels that were excluded from the official New Testament texts, like the Gospel of Philip, a Gnostic text discovered in 1945 as part of the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt. In this Gospel, Mary Magdalene is described as Jesus's companion, and it states that he often kissed her, which made the other disciples jealous. While a kiss in this context could be a ritualistic sign of fellowship, The text's emphasis on her special status is undeniable. It portrays her as the disciple who understood Jesus' teachings on a deeper level than even the male apostles. According to the Grail theory, the marriage between Jesus and Mary Magdalene was not just a personal union, but a powerful political and dynastic one. Jesus was a descendant of the royal line of King David, a claimant to the throne of Israel. Mary Magdalene, some traditions claim, was herself from the powerful tribe of Benjamin. A marriage between them would have united two important royal Jewish houses, creating a powerful political entity that would have been a direct threat to both the Roman occupiers and the established temple priesthood in Jerusalem. This, the theory argues, was the real reason Jesus was seen as such a threat, not just as a spiritual teacher, but as a king with a legitimate claim to power. And if they were married, the theory takes the next logical and most explosive step: they had a child. At the time of the crucifixion, Mary Magdalene was pregnant. This completely reframes the events of the Gospels. The crucifixion was not just the sacrifice of a savior. It was an attempted assassination of a king to extinguish his royal bloodline. But the attempt failed. While the king was killed, his bloodline, his legacy, was carried on secretly, inside the womb of his queen. Mary Magdalene now becomes the most important person in the story. She is the living Grail, the chalice carrying the royal blood, the hope for the future. The disciples' primary mission after the crucifixion was no longer just to spread Jesus' teachings, but to protect his pregnant wife and his unborn child at all costs. With this astonishing secret at its core, the legend of Joseph of Arimathea takes on a whole new meaning. His journey to the shores of Britain, or as this version of the theory usually posits, to the south of France, was not about smuggling a wooden cup out of the Holy Land. It was a rescue mission. Joseph of Arimathea, the wealthy and influential disciple, used his resources to orchestrate the escape of the pregnant Mary Magdalene. The vessel he was guarding was not a relic, but a person. She fled Palestine, crossing the Mediterranean, and found refuge in a land far from her enemies. The most common destination in this version of the legend is Gaul, modern-day France, which had a large and established Jewish community at the time, making it a plausible and safe destination. According to these legends, which are particularly strong in the south of France, Mary Magdalene landed on the shores of what is now Provence, at a place today called Saintes Maries de la Mer, Saints Marys of the Sea. With her, legend says, was her child, a daughter named Sarah. The name Sarah in Hebrew means princess. Here, in the safety of a foreign land, the royal bloodline of Jesus Christ survived. The child grew, married into the local nobility, and the sacred lineage began to blend with the noble families of Europe. The blood of David and Jesus was secretly passed down through the generations, a hidden stream flowing beneath the surface of official history. This hidden bloodline, this Grail, is the true Holy Grail, and the secret of its existence is the ultimate hidden truth. A secret so powerful it could shatter the very foundations of institutional Christianity. The implications are staggering. If Jesus had a wife and child, he was a mortal man, a prophet and a king, but a man nonetheless. This would directly contradict the central doctrine of his divinity as established by the Church at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. It would mean that the concept of celibacy for priests, based on the example of a supposedly celibate Christ, was founded on a false premise. It would suggest that the authority of the Church, passed down through St. Peter and his male successors, was a usurpation, and that the true spiritual authority should have descended through Jesus' own family, through the line of Mary Magdalene. It would transform Christianity, shifting its focus from faith in a divine Savior in the sky to the preservation of a sacred, earthly bloodline. This secret was simply too dangerous to be written down plainly. The Church, which based its power on the Petrine doctrine of apostolic succession, would have seen this alternative lineage as the ultimate heresy. Anyone who knew the truth and spoke it openly would have been hunted down and silenced. The keepers of this secret needed a way to preserve their knowledge, and pass it on to future generations without alerting the authorities. They needed a code, and so, the theory argues, they created the Grail romances. The stories of knights searching for a lost cup were an ingenious allegory. The Grail was the lost feminine principle, embodied by Mary Magdalene and her descendants. The wasteland was the state of the world under a patriarchal church that had suppressed this truth. The Fisher King represented the wounded, broken lineage, waiting to be healed and restored to its rightful place. And the quest was the ongoing effort of a secret society to protect the bloodline and one day reveal its existence to the world. The stories were a secret map, a way of communicating the truth to those with the eyes to see and the ears to hear. If such a monumental secret existed, it would require an equally monumental organization to protect it. The keepers of this truth would have to be powerful, secretive, and utterly dedicated. They would be the guardians of the real Grail. According to the most famous version of this theory, that organization was a secret society known as the Priory of Shaun. This is where the story takes a turn into the murky waters of modern myth-making, a place where historical fact, clever forgery, and boundless speculation blend into an almost inextricable tangle. The story of the Priory of Shaun as we know it today was largely introduced to the world in the 1982 best-selling book The Holy Blood and the Holy Grail by Michael Bygent, Richard Lee, and Henry Lincoln. The authors claim to have uncovered evidence of a secret society that has been operating behind the scenes of European history for over 1,000 years. According to their research, the priory was founded in Jerusalem in 1099, during the First Crusade by Godfrey of Bouillon, the first Christian ruler of Jerusalem. Its primary mission from the very beginning was to protect the Merovingian dynasty, a line of French kings who ruled from the 5th to the 8th century. The author's central claim is that the Merovingian kings were the direct descendants of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. Their bloodline, the Sangreal, had intermarried with the Frankish tribes, and the Merovingians were the result. This is why the Merovingian kings were known as the long-haired kings. Their long hair was a symbol of their sacred, magical connection to their ancestors, much like Samson in the Old Testament. They were more than just rulers. They were priest-kings, sacred figures whose power came directly from their holy blood. The Priory of Shaun, therefore, was created to protect these kings and their claim to the throne. They were the secret power behind the Merovingian throne. And when the last Merovingian king was deposed in the 8th century by the Carolingian dynasty, the line of Charlemagne, with the full backing of the Pope, the priory's mission changed. It was no longer about protecting a ruling dynasty, but about preserving the secret of the bloodline and working patiently, over centuries, to one day restore it to its rightful place of power in Europe. To carry out this centuries-long secret mission, the priory allegedly enlisted some of the greatest minds in Western history to serve as its grand masters. The list of supposed leaders is astonishing, a veritable who's who of European art, science, and philosophy. It includes figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Isaac Newton, Sandro Botticelli, Victor Hugo, and Jean Cocteau. These brilliant men, the theory claims, were not just artistic or scientific geniuses. They were initiates into the great secret. They embedded clues and symbols related to the Sangreal and the sacred feminine in their most famous works. Leonardo's The Last Supper, for instance, is reinterpreted not as a painting of Jesus and his 12 male apostles, but as Jesus with his wife, Mary Magdalene, seated at his right hand, the figure traditionally identified as a youthful, effeminate-looking John the Apostle. The V shape formed between Jesus and this figure is said to represent the chalice, the symbol of the female womb. Isaac Newton's obsession with alchemy and biblical prophecy was not a quirky hobby, but part of his work as a grandmaster, trying to decode the secrets of the universe and history. The art and science of Europe, in this view, become a vast interconnected web of coded messages, all pointing back to the hidden bloodline. The priory's most famous public-facing arm, according to the theory, was the Knights Templar. The priory created the Templars as their military and financial wing. While the Templars were out in the world, building castles and protecting pilgrims, their true secret mission, known only to their highest leaders, was to serve the goals of the Priory of Chaon. When the Templars were brutally suppressed in the 14th century, the priory simply retreated back into the shadows, severing its ties with its now-defunct military branch and continuing its work in secret. It is a stunning, all-encompassing narrative. It connects the Gospels, the Grail romances, the Merovingian kings, the Knights Templar, and the great minds of the Renaissance into a single secret history of the world. But is any of it true? When historians began to dig into the claims made in the Holy Blood and the Holy Grail, the entire edifice began to crumble. It was discovered that the ancient historical documents that formed the basis of the Priory of Chaon theory, known as the Dossiers Secrets d'Henri Lobinot, Secret Dossiers of Henri Lobinot, which were discovered in the National Library of France in Paris, were not ancient at all. They were forgeries, cleverly planted in the library in the 1960s. And the man who planted them was a French eccentric and con artist named Pierre Plantard. Plantard, it turned out, had fabricated the entire ancient history of the Priory of Chaon. He had created the lists of Grand Masters and had linked his own family name to the Merovingian bloodline, essentially trying to invent a noble ancestry for himself and claim that he was the rightful secret king of France. The Priory of Chaon was a real organization, but it wasn't an ancient secret society. It was a small local club that Plantard himself had founded in France in 1956. The entire elaborate conspiracy was a modern hoax, a brilliant piece of fiction masquerading as history. For many, this revelation completely debunks the sang-real theory. If the Priory of Chaon was a fraud, then the whole idea of a secret society protecting the bloodline is built on a foundation of lies. And yet, the idea refuses to die. Even if Pierre Plantard's Priory of Chaon was a hoax, it doesn't necessarily invalidate the core concept. The idea that the Grail is a symbol for a hidden truth is much older than Plantard's forgeries. The questions raised by the theory are still deeply compelling. Why is Mary Magdalene portrayed in such a contradictory way in different texts? Why were the Gnostic Gospels, with their emphasis on the sacred feminine and direct, personal knowledge of God, so violently suppressed by the early Church? Why did the Grail romances, with their enigmatic symbolism, appear so suddenly and with such force in the 12th century? The hoax of the Priory of Chaon may have been debunked, but it doesn't answer these more fundamental questions. It's possible that Plantard simply latched onto a much older, more authentic tradition and co-opted it for his own purposes. The idea of a hidden truth, a disciplina arcani or discipline of the secret in the early Church, is a recurring theme in historical and theological studies. This brings us to the ultimate implication of the metaphorical Grail. If the Grail is not an object but a secret, then the quest is not about finding an artifact, but about uncovering a hidden truth. It transforms the search from an archaeological treasure hunt into a profound intellectual and spiritual investigation. The Grail becomes the personification of lost knowledge, of suppressed histories, and of truths that institutions have sought to control or erase. In this context, the Grail is the ultimate symbol of heresy, a challenge to orthodox authority in all its forms. To search for this Grail is to question everything we have been taught. It is to read between the lines of official history, to listen to the whispers of folklore, and to seek out the voices that have been silenced. It means re-examining the role of women in religious history, not just Mary Magdalene, but the countless priestesses, prophetesses, and goddesses whose worship was stamped out by patriarchal religions. The Grail in this sense is the sacred feminine principle itself, a concept of balance between male and female divinity that, according to this view, was deliberately broken by the established Church. The recovery of the Grail, therefore, would mean the restoration of this balance, a healing of the spiritual wasteland created by centuries of one-sided patriarchal dogma. This version of the Grail is not something that can be put in a museum. It cannot be carbon dated or analyzed in a lab. It exists in the realm of ideas, It is a powerful what if, a thought experiment that forces us to confront the nature of history, power, and faith. It suggests that the most valuable treasures are not made of gold and jewels, but of knowledge. The secrets it claims are all around us, hidden in plain sight, encoded in art, architecture, and the very stories we tell ourselves. The Sistine Chapel, the cathedrals of the Templars, the sonnets of Shakespeare, the tales of King Arthur, they all become potential pieces of the puzzle. The world becomes a library of secrets waiting for a key. Ultimately, this theory presents us with a choice. We can see the Grail as a physical object, a lost relic from the time of Christ, a quest that will likely never be fulfilled. Or we can see it as a powerful, enduring symbol of a hidden truth, a quest not for an object, but for enlightenment. This Grail is not lost. It is simply concealed. It is a challenge to every generation to embark on its own quest, to ask the forbidden questions, to connect the scattered clues, and to dare to uncover the truth for themselves. The real treasure is not the cup, but the revelation that follows the search. And that is a quest that never truly ends. It is a mystery that continues to call to us from across the centuries, promising that the greatest secrets are still waiting to be discovered. The Holy Grail remains a perfect mystery, existing at the crossroads of faith, history, and legend. Whether it is a physical artifact lost to time or a powerful symbol of a hidden truth, its story endures. The quest for the Grail continues, not in ancient lands, but in our own endless curiosity. If the past still whispers to you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Ancient Relics Keeper, because some mysteries were never meant to be buried.